Okay, so let's get right into it. We're going to talk about a sound that became the foundation for pretty much all modern music, the Delta Blues. And it's a story that's about way more than just music. It's about incredible legends, haunting melodies, and a history that is way, way harsher than most people realize.
You really can't understand the power of the Delta blues without starting with its most legendary figure, Robert Johnson. Rock god Eric Clapton once said his music was the most powerful cry that I think you can find in the human voice. That cry has been echoing for almost 100 years now, but the story behind that cry, well, that's where things get truly staggering.
And what a story it is. This is the one everyone knows, right? The legend says Johnson was just a so-so guitar player who vanished for a bit. He supposedly went down to a crossroads in Mississippi, met the devil himself, and treated his soul for an almost supernatural ability to play. It's this powerful, romantic myth that has completely shaped how we see the blues. But it's only a tiny part of the real story. So let's push past the legends of hellhounds and devils for a second. What does this music actually sound like? What are the pieces that make it what it is? The sound is just so incredibly stripped down and raw. Most of the time, it's just one person, one acoustic guitar, and a voice that sounds like it's full of grit and pain. The songs, they usually follow a pretty simple 12-bar pattern, telling stories about lost love, about always being on the move, and about the deep, deep hardships of just trying to get by. But there's one single technique that really defines the entire sound. And this is it, the slide guitar. This is the secret sauce. Players would literally take a glass bottleneck, or even the edge of a knife, and slide it up and down the strings. And what you get is this eerie, wailing sound that sounds almost exactly like a human voice crying out. It's the sound of pure soul and sorrow, and it is absolutely essential to the Delta Blues. A sound that haunting really makes you wonder, doesn't it? It feels like it comes from a place of just deep, deep pain. So the question is, what kind of world could possibly create a sound like that? While the answer to that question isn't found in some myth about a deal with the devil, no, the real story is rooted in the brutal, violent, and very real world of the American South in the early 20th century. This slide says just about everything. Between 1882 and 1968, Mississippi, the very birthplace of the blues, led the entire nation in the documented lynching of African Americans. This wasn't something that happened once in a while. It was a constant, terrifying reality used to enforce a truly brutal social order. This was the Jim Crow era, a system designed from the ground up to control every single aspect of Black life. We're talking economic oppression, total segregation, and the ever-present threat of random violence. The hellhound that Robert Johnson sang about being on his trail, it wasn't a supernatural demon. It was the very real terror of this world. And this history wasn't abstract for Robert Johnson. This was his actual life. In 1909, his own father, who was a successful furniture maker, had to literally run for his life from a lynch mob. So Johnson was born into a family that was torn apart by racial violence. Then, when he was just 19, his teenage wife and their baby both died during childbirth. This was the hardship he was pouring into his music. But this music, born from such specific and agonizing circumstances, didn't stay locked away in the Delta. It started a journey that would end up changing the sound of the entire planet. You can draw a straight line, really. This raw acoustic blues traveled north with folks during the Great Migration. Musicians like Muddy Waters get to cities like Chicago, they plug in their guitars, and suddenly you have this powerful electric sound. Then, in the 1960s, British bands like the Rolling Stones and Cream get their hands on these records, they reinterpret them, and they basically invent rock and roll as we know it. The DNA of the Delta is in almost every pop song you hear today. So, with a history that complex and that painful, how do we choose to remember the blues today? Do we focus on the legend, or do we focus on the reality? Well, one thing's for sure, it's become a massive commercial industry. Robert Johnson's recordings, they've sold over 1 million copies. He even won a Grammy Award more than 50 years after he died in poverty at the age of 27. The art that was born from oppression is now a multi-million-dollar business. But this is where critics are starting to ask some really important questions. As this study points out, the way we package the blues for tourists often gives a really simplified, romantic version of the story. It focuses on the myth, but it, quote, consistently underrepresents the African American lived experience.
The violence, the poverty, the systemic oppression that was the true source of the blues.
So it really brings us to these two competing stories. On one side, you've got the mythic South, full of these romantic legends of crossroads and devils and individual genius. And on the other side, you've got the lived experience, a story of racial terror, of the brutal reality of sharecropping, and of art as a tool for a whole community to survive. And so often we get this sanitized myth instead of the harsh truth. And that leaves us with one last really powerful question to think about. When we listen to this incredible music, when we celebrate its legends and its massive influence, whose story are we truly telling? Are we honoring the myth, or are we bearing witness to the brutal reality that created one of the most powerful art forms in human history?